Well, hello and thank you for joining me for the Alex on Tech and TechAdvice.Life video interview. I'm joined again by Chris Griffith, now a freelance journalist, but of course he was with The Australian for 15 years. And Chris is joining me from Barcelona, where we've just had the Mobile World Congress for a week. And Chris has written an incredible number of stories, all published at channelnews.com.au and at his LinkedIn site. Chris, thanks for joining me.
Hello, Alex, and welcome from this fantastic location in Barcelona. I've just spent 4 days at the World Mobile Congress Telecommunications Conference. Really exciting conference. This place is quite memorable too because Barcelona has its own Arc de Triomphe. Now, this was actually the location of the 1888 World Fair, this whole promenade here. Beautiful buildings around here. I've been living in this area. So fantastic to be here. And I think a very apt location for this discussion.
Yeah, no, it really looks fantastic. It's such a beautiful visual behind you. We're very lucky to see it. Now, can you just recap quickly, if you know, the number of exhibitors or the number of people that were there? It must have been absolutely packed.
I don't know the exact number, but it was thousands. It was certainly packed. Typically, the first 2 days, it was hard to get around at times, and there's a dozen or so halls, and they were all chock-a-block with people, and there were a lot of meetings going on. I had meetings with various people and interviews to do, and a big media room there, which was also full of people from all around the world. So it just has that sort of freneticism that you hope to see at a conference like this, and some very cutting edge speakers as well.
Yeah. Now, if I have a look at your LinkedIn page where you've got all the different stories listed, I mean, there's SpaceX testing LEO satellites, the texting services coming to Optus, there's AI drugs targeting proteins being close according to DeepMind, Google admits being blitzed by OpenAI. Where do you want to start?
Well, maybe we should start with DeepMind. Their CEO was here, and he gave a long talk. It was in an interview format, and two of those stories came from there. It was very interesting when he said that, look, we at Google were not anticipating OpenAI to come to market so quickly as they did, and they thought OpenAI would iron out a bit more of the bugs in ChatGPT, but he said what we realized was that the public were really keen to get into this technology, whether it was good or not. It was a bit of a surprise, and still is, to a lot of observers, how it gives the appearance of Google being slow with Gemini coming to market. And that's because if you go back to about 2017, they seem to be so far ahead in market. I went to a big conference of theirs in Tokyo where they talked about their vision of AI. They launched this TensorFlow hardware for machine learning and demonstrated it. And that's now 7 years ago. And we thought, God, these guys are well ahead of the field. But it all seemed to be quite different by the time that OpenAI came along. And Google are kind of struggling a bit to get Gemini in there now that ChatGPT and Copilot are well in market. So a big issue for them. But the CEO of DeepMind also talked about AI and medicines. Now, there's been AI kind of used in medicines, but he's interested in the protein level and the genetic level. And he explained how they were able to map at this stage all the proteins that are in the human body and their transition from a genetic code to a 3D protein, which signifies what the protein does, and how they're developing their medicines around being able to attach bits of protein, I assume, to proteins to modify them and work that way on disease. And I think that's a huge thing because there's probably a lot of diseases that fit into the category of being able to be dealt with at that era, at that level, either for the victims involved or in terms of longer term genetic modification. And DeepMind now have signed with 2 US big drug companies, which are involved in actually starting to test and produce these drugs, and he's hopeful we'll see this huge stride in medicines within the next couple of years actually come to market and to clinics. So that was really uplifting.
Now, one of the other things that really captured people's attention was HMD, which is the home of Nokia phones, announcing a partnership with Mattel to have the Barbie phone. Now, I've been reading about this, and apparently it's going to be a flip phone, like a feature phone, and I'm sort of a bit dismayed. I mean, I think that's a bit of an insult to women. Why don't women want to have a full Android experience? I know that they're talking about it being a phone that doesn't have notifications, but you can turn notifications off. But did you get to see a Barbie flip phone? From what I can tell, there's only pixelated versions of it. They didn't actually launch it, but still, the buzz was quite huge.
Well, I was at the press conference with HMD Global, and Mattel were there in force and speaking about it. They're obviously part of this drive. I think the story did turn into why a pink feature phone, because, yeah, it does look a bit like Barbie is being cast as a bit of a Luddite here, using phone architecture that's about feature phones, 1990s, they're more than 2 decades old, quarter of a century old. And isn't this an insult? But the argument that was put was that there's been a real resurgence in feature phones, at least this is a spin by HMD, that there has been a resurgence in feature phones, with Gen Z seeing more than their predecessors the need to disconnect from the internet, to have a life away from it. And going to a feature phone is a good way of doing it. So that was the message there. Now, do you believe that message? Frankly, I don't. I think it's just marketing for the flip phone. It looks a really nice flip phone, I might say, and I quite like flip phones, but they lack a fair bit of the features of our modern phones. And I think if I used it for more than a couple of hours, I'd be scratching my head and wondering what's happening on all these other things that I'm involved in at the time.
Well, I mean, again, I think it's a bit of an insult to women. I mean, there's a flip phone. I've got the Samsung Galaxy Flip, which is a wonderful device. And why? I mean, you can turn your Android phone or your Apple iPhone into basically a feature phone device. You can switch off all the different advanced features. You can put your Samsungs into simple mode. So, but much more interesting from HMD was this concept of self-repairing phones. What were they talking about there?
Well, I've followed this for years. I mean, I know Kurt Wiens, the CEO of iFixit, the company in the US that produces kits to enable you to fix your phones and now have spare parts. They have how-to videos. They've been doing that for a long time. And I got to chat to Kurt, and he was saying, well, now I'm at the stage where the phone makers are coming to me to be able to modify their, to know what to do to make their phones more modifiable, and that this is, and he's in hot demand for this. So it's becoming popular from the sustainability point of view, and from the economic point of view, Joe. I say that people don't want to throw away their phones if it's just got a cracked screen or a battery problem. They want to be able to replace them, and that was what he was on about. So HMD have done it. Now, I went to Lenovo's booth, and they had their newest laptops with the tops off, the keyboards off.
That. Yeah.
And they were replacing, batteries and internal parts, and it was almost like you could just undo a couple of screws and they kind of click out, and you put the new one in. I mean, that made repairability much simpler. You can even, if you don't know how much RAM you want, or you want to change the drive to up the amount of storage, you can do that with clicking in and clicking out. Now, so this is fantastic. This is about, in the modern age, sustainability. But if you go back to 20, 30 years ago, I mean, it's a bit of back to the future, because I, like you, like a lot of people, we would spend part of our Sunday mornings at like a school that was set up doing the Sunday morning tech market.
Yeah.
And I'd be buying, graphics cards and, a $10 monitor that I think was fantastic to buy as a second or third monitor, and all the bits and pieces, and motherboards, and you'd go home and you'd unpack them all and spend part of your afternoon actually assembling a computer. Now, that was great. It was easier when we had a big computer to do that because there's lots more space. But finally, I think that's filtering down into the laptop market, and that's great news for consumers as well as for the environment, that we're not going to be tossing away things so much, whether it's laptops or indeed phones.
Yeah, e-waste is a huge problem, and there have been some attempts by manufacturers over the past couple of years to have laptops that are more easily repairable, or you can replace the processor. There's lots of different sort of things that are happening in that space that I've heard about. But to have someone like Lenovo coming out, I mean, that really puts the stamp of this being something that they really want to have happen. And of course, the other big thing that Lenovo was showcasing was their transparent screen, which there are videos all over X and other places. Did you get a chance to see the transparent screen?
Well, where I was, unfortunately, it wasn't on display at their booth, but they were talking about it. And I've got two views about this. I think it's very interesting tech that they can do it, but at the same time, I struggle to think what the use cases are. Now, we've had transparent TVs around for years, actually. I think the first was way back in 2013. So there's nothing new about that. And they do have a bit of a use case. You see them in shop windows, for example, with see-through displays in shop windows. And you could mount them in your home on a wall and have what is normally a window between two rooms turn into a TV. But at the laptop size level, it's hard to know what advantage there would be. Maybe it's good to be able to, maybe you can have some kind of augmented reality experience of seeing something at the back of the screen. Maybe you could put a card there and superimpose it with something at the foreground of the screen. One person there joked that maybe it's great for another Australian guy being able to see if there's a cockroach or a huntsman spider crawling up the back of your laptop.
Yeah.
So that would be a use case, but we were struggling with that. But what I thought was, in the end, more interesting from Lenovo was their foldable phone. Now, we've had foldable phones around a while, and I remember seeing foldable screens way back in the days of HP in their labs, and you'd fold it around your wrist. And they had signed, I don't know if it ever took place, but a deal with the US military so that someone in the military could have like a circuit diagram on their wrist and a screwdriver in their other hand doing in the field repairs and things like that. But what was really great about this was that you had a phone that was working and you could press the buttons on it or in the display but you could really take it and then fold it tight so it actually wrapped around your wrist like a bracelet, as if it was the way you'd carry your phone around. Now, it was a prototype like the laptop, but if that comes to market, I think that could be really quite fascinating if you get to the point where it becomes almost like your smartwatch at the same time. And in fact, they showed, they didn't let us touch it, unfortunately, but they had it around a person's wrist, and suddenly the screen would go and on would come the clock face. And so it was this one device being both. I think that's a real go. There's always been, I think, a market for foldable screens on phones like that. It's just a matter of them actually going to the production line, really, I think, soon, hopefully, and bringing it to market.
Yeah, well, you're gonna have to wonder what happens if you sort of bang your arm against things as you're walking by the wall or doors and things. You'd wonder how durable that particular screen is and how you protect it. I mean, it'd be very sort of difficult to have screen protectors that sort of bend and fold. But look, the other big thing
being in this part of the world, and maybe Australia too, I'd be wondering, like in a train with pickpockets, you're there and you're staring at the next station and you got your arm down there and someone could quickly nick your foldable phone off your wrist. So they'll have to have some kind of safety mechanism to stop that sort of thing, I think, for sure.
I do remember being in a magic show and this guy sort of grabbed my arm, and next thing he's opening up some sort of box, and inside the box is my watch, and I didn't even realize that he'd taken the watch off my hand. So I mean, the pickpockets apparently in Barcelona are rife. They're probably very advanced. So yeah, that would be quite a funny thing. Now we also
I think
saw,
they're very
yeah,
high tech here. Yes.
yeah. No, we also saw another wearable device that was the Samsung Galaxy Ring, and there's been a lot of talk that Apple's going to release a ring. So, what did you learn about the wearable ring for all the health benefits that Samsung's talking about?
I mean, Samsung's been very interesting. Like this, if they're taking a really drip feed approach to telling people exactly what's happening and what the features are. Uh, I saw it there, got to photograph a glass case like it was the Mona Lisa or something like that. And there was all these rings. They look very much like wedding rings, I've got to say. They're kind of gold and plain and round. Um, so I got to see it, photograph it. We know it's a health device, and slowly and surely there's more information coming out about it. So we're going to see that. And the other thing that wasn't here, which I thought would be here, but I think coming to market, is the health device I might have mentioned before by Withings, which is like a full checkup of one device for your temperature, your blood flow, your heart rate, everything like that integrated, that you can get up in the morning and everyone in the family can use.
Yeah.
But I hope to have more on that soon. But yeah, Samsung were there, but yeah, they normally are very in your face, Samsung, with details of what they're on about, but not in this case.
Yeah, it reminds me, the Withings device reminds me of the Star Trek tricorder. And I mean, that's something that's
It
been
does
around.
indeed. I thought of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
The absolute instant checkup in one device thing, but it's a lot more elegant in than the tricorder. It doesn't have those bones would push all those buttons on the tricorder.
That's
It,
right.
it
That's
just
right. Yeah,
seems to
well,
be one, two, three.
yeah, I mean, in Star Trek: The Next Generation, they were holding what looked like a little cork, basically, and it would have shining, flashing lights, and somehow it communicated with her iPad-style device. So, look, we're yet to see what's going to happen there. But and also, you mentioned that these look like the wedding rings. I was the best man at a wedding a few years ago, and of course, I'm looking up the best man speeches, and I'd heard this joke before about the three rings of marriage, which was the engagement ring, the wedding ring, and of course the suffering. But I thought, no, I'm going to update this for the 21st century. So I came up with the four rings of marriage, which was of course, the engagement ring and the wedding ring and the suffering. But I said, in the age of Netflix and chill, you had the buffering. So, yeah.
Well, I was thinking along similar lines, but slightly differently. I was thinking about the marriage vows in sickness and in health.
Yeah.
That maybe that's the time you should put your Samsung, your partner will give you your Samsung ring as health measurement in the middle of the wedding ceremony. I don't know if it'll make its way into that, but it's a possibility. I suppose it as well.
You never know. Now, we also saw the Clicks BlackBerry style keyboard attachment for the iPhone. Now, I remember a few years ago, I think maybe even Will I Am or somebody famous had come out with one, and it never really took off then. What did this one look like?
It looked really, really like a proper
Physical
BlackBerry
keyboard. Yeah.
clicks, and it clicked like it. But there was a couple of things that made this really resonate for me. One was that I saw again, it happened to be on the plane coming across, the movie about the rise and fall of BlackBerry. So that was fresh in my mind. And I was looking at this thing, and it's like a case with a keyboard in the bottom of the case, and the iPhone fits in it quite snugly. They've made it really only for the iPhone 14 and 15 Pro and Pro Max to date, but they're doing more. But what really brought it home to me was the guy who was showing it to me. I said, "Oh, what do you do?" And he said, "I'm the CMO, I think he is, or something of Clicks." And he then said, "I worked for BlackBerry for 10 years." And I thought, right, this guy has got to be the true believer, because what happened with BlackBerry was Lazaridis refused to contemplate properly, or that's how the movie depicted it, that the keyboard was a great encumbrance going forward for BlackBerry, rather than, no keyboard was the real key that got the iPhone 2 ahead, way back in 2007. And here we are, a true believer. Let's see, 18 years later, advocating for the return of the keyboard to the iPhone, which has, I think, great historical precedence if you'd followed the tech from that time.
Yeah. Look, I know that when I talked about it on X with various people, somebody said, look, the thing they really liked about the BlackBerry keyboard was that they could type messages with their thumbs without looking at the keys. And yes, that's something that's much more difficult to do on a glass keyboard. I actually have been able to sort of start typing on a glass keyboard and on the iPhone, and most of the time I can sort of get it right, and I know how to swipe various things. But sometimes, of course, you don't get it right because if you put your finger in the wrong spot, you're typing in the wrong thing. So look, there will always be people who love the physical keyboard, and for those that love it and have an iPhone 14 or 15 to start with, well, it'll be available hopefully to buy at retail soon. Now, another great thing was Li-Fi, which is like a version of Wi-Fi but using light. And I've heard about that for some years, but there was another development at MWC. Please tell us.
Yes, well, Li-Fi, as you say, you've got it data streaming or data transfers, but instead of using RF, you're using actually the light spectrum. And the first thing that their CEO told me was, he said that there is so much more light spectrum available for this that you can safely do it in an environment and not have any kind of clashes of spectrum and anything like this. And the next question is, why haven't we been doing this for years and years? Well, he said, well, because it's light and it doesn't go through walls in buildings, and but that's its strength. You can set up the secure transmissions if you've got a secure operation, and know that the light's not going to go through the walls. And you can have a whole series of devices. It could be a control room in a highly secured installation with various things in the room all connected up. You can, if you're in the field in military, you can quickly set this up and take it away and pack it up without having to worry about cables and so on. And he said, that's been the use case in the past, is that we've sold this to US military, UK military, and NATO. So they've been using this apparently because of the security that light doesn't go through walls unless you've got Superman's X-ray vision or something like that.
Yeah.
And now he said, now we're wanting to bring this into the consumer market, because one thing that we can do is in areas where there's a lot of devices onto a Wi-Fi network, we can create an access point and have an auxiliary network and have lots and lots of devices on these. And we've set this up so that they can be individually callable via the access point, via the Wi-Fi network. So the access point becomes a bit transparent, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And so you can have pretty big networks at a fairly marginal cost. So that was his pitch, and let's hope that we see that company was called Pure Li-Fi. But we've got to, obviously, with a lot of these companies we see here, we have to see whether vision becomes reality. But certainly it sounds a really interesting development.
I know that infrared has been used for years with remote controls, and I was showing someone the other day this famous commercial from the Palm Pilot days where there was a man and a woman on opposing trains, one going in one direction, one going in the other. And they looked at each other, and it was sort of like, I want to know you, and he wanted to know her, and she wanted to know him. So they each grabbed their Palm Pilot, and they beamed each other their contact details. And, they were so happy to be able to swap details because they were on opposing trains. And if you look on YouTube, you can find this commercial. A lot of people might not remember it.
Well, we can kind of do that with iPhones and to some extent with Android phones. And Androids, you've got to put the two together like this. Yes. iPhones, you're back to back. But yeah, they're getting there, but you'd be risking your hands putting them out the window of the trains to.
Well, it was through the glass. I mean, it wasn't even. There weren't even. I mean, she was on one side with the glass. He was on the other side, and somehow the ad showed that it made it work. So look, it was just it was a commercial. I mean, if one of them didn't have a Palm Pilot,
I've got to say we were almost trying to do this when we had our COVID Safe app, which of course didn't work. But there was a bit of that in passing people in the street that might have COVID within by the connection of the signals, and it was complex tech, but it just reminded me of it. You talking about that, but yeah, that's we'll just see. Everything in fiction seems to eventually become reality in tech, doesn't it? So we'll see.
It does, yeah. Well, science fiction becomes science fact every day. So one of the other things that you wrote about was ZTE, which is a big Chinese brand of making smartphones. They had a 3D tablet. What was that all about?
Well, it seemed to do the job pretty well, but again, it seemed to be back to the future. With 3D technology, we've moved on to AR, VR, so on. But I guess there's been of recent times a bit of a resurgence in movies. I think Avatar 2 had a 3D element to it. I haven't seen Avatar 2, but apparently they did. There's gaming around 3D as well. So there is a use case, and you've got to remember that ZTE, while we have their handsets in Australia, usually rebranded under Telstra or something like that. There's a huge Chinese market, and there's cultural diversity of what people in that market might be interested in, and that was what they wanted to talk about. But they did actually announce a slew of devices, and well under $200, I might add. But they included a flip phone, and I thought that could be really good. It looked pretty good. I don't know how good its cameras are, but it looked pretty good. They had a little music thing that looked like an iPod Nano, a very lightweight wafer thin device, which I never bought, but I thought maybe I'd buy that. A nice looking foldable phone, which will be cheap. Now, these are at the real cheap end, like in Australia, $300 and less phones with all these form factors coming out, and they could be really good for the Australian market. But we'll just have to see. You can try and buy them from ZTE directly. You've got to be careful that they are in the right spectrum once you buy internationally. But Telstra usually stock a lot of their stuff, and they're back in market. They were banned a few years ago because they breached the international trade boycott of Iran, I think it was, a few years ago, and so they were sin bin for a while, but they seem to be back in a vengeance at this time.
Now, another brand that we don't really know much about in Australia, it was a sub-brand of Huawei, and I think they sold it off, but it was called Honor, and they're coming out with some high-end devices. So what did you see with those?
Yes, Honor's gone from being a brand originally, not all the time, but originally a cheap brand for Huawei, to now being the opposite, really expensive. It's a kind of open your wallet territory with Honor. Like they've got a very nice high-end, high camera, lots of terabytes, big 16 RAM and beautiful displays, foldable phone, which I think was in the high twos or low 3,000 euro mark. And then they announced one which has been developed in partnership with Porsche, of all people. So apparently when you open it, you can see the lines of a Porsche car on one side of it. And they had the CEO and that of Porsche standing up here talking about how they partnered on this. And I talk about going from one end of the market to the other. And they also had a very beautiful looking high-end smartphone as well, the Magic 6. So I think it was the Magic 2V was the foldable phone, and the Magic 6 was their phone. But what I wrote was the Porsche version of the foldable phone was so expensive that it was almost the price for a deposit in some areas on a Porsche car. So it was a case of, what do you want, the car or the phone?
Yeah, well, Porsche's campaign is always, if not now, when? So trying to get you to buy it now. And of course, Huawei did a lot of stuff with Porsche design. So, I mean, the company's got, or at least the company's roots has history in working with those sorts of high-end companies. And why not? I mean, we had Nokia with Carl Zeiss for many years, and there was all sorts of, partnerships, I think, with Leica and others with Huawei. So, well, let's finish with AI and its really startling consumption of water. I mean, people wouldn't normally think AI and water go together, but there's a link.
Yes, there is, and there's been a bit of a worry with AI generally already, because we've seen something like a 23% increase in power consumption in Microsoft's data centers, and of recent times. I think those figures were 2022. I went online, and it was interesting to see the number of papers coming up talking first about linking AI with uh, uh, the burden it was creating in data centers generally, because a lot of the processing of AI happens in data centers. So there's been that worry about the capacity of data centers to deal with it. But then there's this, you add on another thing, and that is the more work's being done in data centers, the more cooling they required and the more water they're using. And the stories that were being quoted were talking about, golf course volumes, football field volumes of extra water usage. And this has been an issue for a while, enough for some of the big companies to have 2030 targets of being water positive. And that applies to Google, Microsoft, AWS, and Meta. All say they'll be water positive by 2030. That means they will run projects around the world that will create more water than they use. Now, I think this is going to be difficult because some of these projects are fantastic. AWS, during the conference, announced one in partnership with Sydney Water, all these various environmental moves which will help increase the water base and the amount of water available for Sydney Water. But that's the kind of work that has to be done. But we're only at 2024 and there's another 6 years to go. That means 6 more years of what will probably be exponential development of AI and general AI. And whether these projects, enough of them can roll out to actually replenish the water that they're taking, I think is going to be an incredible ask. And they've already talked about data centers depleting water in the Sahara Basin critically because of data centers. So I think it's a huge issue. And they said every time you go online and ask ChatGPT 20 or so questions, you're also asking ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini, and that to gulp down a 600 milliliter bottle of water at the same time.
Yeah.
So
great. Well, here we go.
Just bear in mind, you're making it drink an awful lot.
Yeah. Well, were there two things? One, I did see somebody, I forget who it was, but they were announcing that they would be, net zero or carbon neutral, whatever it was, not by 2030, as we've heard a lot of in recent times, but this time by 2040. So the it keeps getting pushed out, all the different, the timelines as to when they're going to achieve.
Now that's going to be hard in the sense of predicting, because by then we're going to have quantum computers.
That's right.
Adding to this, and we know very little about how they're going to impact environmentally, or at least we don't hear that much about them. We're at early stages of development, but you've got to watch some of these promises because they're great ideas. But and I really do believe the big companies are wedded to these 2030 deadlines, but the amount of effort they're going to do to meet them could be really quite enormous.
Yeah. Well, we have seen, car companies in the US decide, the car rental companies like Hertz, they wanted to get rid of a third or half of their electric vehicle fleets. Apparently in the US, electric vehicles are the cheapest ones to rent because people just don't want them. They want the certainty of having, a petrol or diesel fuel car, so they don't have to worry about finding a charging station. The charging station is totally full. When there's totally full, there's a 1 or 2 kilometer line of cars waiting. Then if everything is full, it takes longer to charge because the superchargers were only designed to have 80% capacity at any one time. And people like Mercedes-Benz have said they're going to push back their electric car plans by 5 years. So they can make all these big promises. Sounds great when it's 15 or 20 years out, but as we get closer and closer, the truth will be told.
That's a slightly different problem. That's kind of the problem of market mass. Like you get to that critical mass stage where it becomes economical sense to roll more charging stations out in the kind of volume that we have fuel pumps. If we had much less petrol cars on the road, then I suppose a lot of servos, fuel pumps would close down. So you've got to get to that point. But we're certainly not anywhere near that. And we're seeing big increases in the numbers of EVs, but that's from a low base, the percentage increases. So
that's right.
We'll have to wait and see.
So last time we spoke, we talked about all the different developments with satellites. So what did you actually see on the ground?
I'll just do a shout back to our previous discussion because I did attend the big satellite and seminar. It was a whole hours and hours of talking about satellites and that. And I think right across the world, there's a belief that we're going to be merging the ground-based phone networks with the satellite networks. I've written a lot on this. You can see it online. We talked a lot about this in our previous discussion.
We did.
The one concrete thing that came out was SpaceX, when they talked about the 7 countries they're doing developments with, and one of them happens to be Optus. So they're going to work a bit like I might have mentioned last time, Lynx Global and their deal with Telstra. Well, what SpaceX are going to do is they've launched 6 of these special different satellites from their normal ones. They launched the Starlink satellites, but these ones are literally mobile phone towers in the sky. So where there's no coverage and you're in the middle of nowhere in Australia, if you're an Optus customer, it'll beam down from around 500 kilometers on the same spectrum that your phone would connect to a ground-based mobile tower. And it won't know it's really in the sky at all. It'll just be another tower, but it's a satellite it's connecting to. And that's why the phones will need no modification at all. However, the big problem with this at the moment is that the bandwidth is not very good at all. It's not even a megabyte going down. It's good going up, going down, it's not very good. And you're going to have to work on that because otherwise we'll be back to what I was talking about before, is a chip in your phone, a radio chip, which can do beamforming and send up to a satellite 500 kilometers in the air. And it can provide really, really good bandwidth and even eventually video calling as well as calling. And but that'll require the next generation of phones to have these chips by MediaTek and other suppliers of microprocessors. But it'll happen. But what will happen with Optus this year, and what seems to be on track, is at least you'll be able to text with this setup that I talked about, the mobile phone towers in the sky. You'll be, by the end of the year, 800 kilometers northwest of Uluru, or up in the Kimberleys or somewhere like that, and you'll be able to text, and you won't know whether it's going to a satellite or some terrestrial station around where you are. So that'll happen. So that was really interesting.
So what are your final observations of MWC 2024, which is now over?
Well, I think it was a really exciting conference. I don't think phones take pride of place as they used to a decade or so ago, but we saw a lot of implementation of AI. The phone chip makers, for example, were providing chips with AI hardwired into them. So in one case, you could actually erase someone from a photo after you've just taken it. It wasn't software driven. It was actually from the chip, and it didn't matter whether you were connected to the internet or at all. There's all sorts of AI applications in the communication space, AI for controlling networks, for making sure you get good data flows across networks. But for me, it still came back to satellites, because they asked people at this satellite conference we talked about, why is this energy all of a sudden there between telcos and satellites? And they said, well, it's probably just Elon Musk. He's given the whole satellite, the low Earth orbit satellite movement, a big hurry up, and they're all in overdrive trying to implement all these new solutions. And so that's where there's a lot of energy this year. And next year could be different, but I think there's a lot of energy in that space. And that was my outtake from, not one of many outtakes, but a really big outtake from the conference.
And you now have your own website. I know you're publishing everything at channelnews.com.au, but you've resurrected, or you've brought chrisgriffith.com to life.
I have, unfortunately, being away from there, the server's gone offline, and I'm 17,000 kilometers away to press the on button, unfortunately. But it will be back online, I promise you. And I have a smattering of what I think significant stories over the time I've been doing tech at the Australian and since. The stories that I think that a bit of evergreens and really important.
Well, Chris, it's been so great to hear you straight from Barcelona. Get the latest about MWC. Please go to channelnews.com.au to read a lot more detail about everything that you've spoken about. And Chris, I look forward to chatting with you again in the future.
Yes, absolutely. I'm off to visit relatives in France and go cycling around Switzerland, which should be a real buzz. So I will talk to you. I'll be doing another conference in about 3 or 4 weeks. But thanks again, Alex. It's been terrific to talk to you. And I'm going to get out in the spring sun here in Barcelona.
Well, I certainly hope that you manage to come across some more tech in Switzerland and in France and find time to write about it. But look, thank you again, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, all the best, and all the best to all the viewers out there as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.